very excited to welcome Chip DeStefano with us today. Chip, so good to see you.
Thanks for inviting me to do this, Tyler. It's great.
Awesome. Now, I know a lot of people who are probably watching this or listening to this have actually seen your name before. They've heard the McCracken Band program at various conference performances, or they've seen your name on books or different things like that. Would you be willing to just share a little bit about yourself and introduce yourself to people who might not have heard your name before?
Sure. Chip DeStefano. I teach at McCracken Middle School in Skokie, Illinois, which is just north of Chicago. And it's my 26th year teaching at McCracken. It's been my first job. More likely than not, it's going to be my last job. And feel really fortunate to teach in a very supportive community and a really great school.
That's terrific. I've as I mentioned before, I know a lot of people have heard your name and of the McCracken Band program. I've enjoyed reading some of the books that Chip has contributed to. Most recently, the one that's the foundations for a successful band program. Did I get the title right?
Yeah, it's close. It's called Foundations. It's the essential elements for. Well, you think I would know it. The essential elements for creating a successful middle school band program.
Absolutely. And if you're a middle school band director, I highly recommend this book. I picked it up at Midwest and I found myself reading it on the plane ride back from Midwest and could not put it down. So
yeah, we're really proud of it. Super.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So it's a really terrific resource. And so I'm excited to have Chip today because the resource that we're here to talk about or that we're here to create is something that can continue to help us improve the teaching of proper tone quality on all the instruments in our band programs, particularly for those of us that are teaching beginners and developing musicians at the middle school level. And so I've asked Chip to join us today because Chip also is a trombone player and is somebody who has had such a record of success with the bands at McCracken. And so Chip, just to throw the ball into your court a little bit, could you just talk to us about how you describe a proper and characteristic tone quality on trombone?
Sure. Well, going to Northwestern, I got both my bachelor's in trombone performance at Northwestern and then my master's at Northwestern. I really kind of, the sound I have in my ear is that of more of an orchestral sound, like orchestral trombone sound. And so the adjectives I like to use to describe that are dark, warm, very resonant, very full. Now those words don't mean a lot to kids, especially right out in that beginner year. And really with those kids, a picture is worth a thousand words. And so a lot of modeling for them, both myself playing and then also having, recordings and that type of thing for the kids. But in the overall band sound, I really like the trombone sound to be very present. And to me, the trombone is kind of the core of the brass sound, kind of in the same way that the clarinet is the core of the woodwind sound. We really, when we're building up our balances, I like to start with the trombone sound and getting that where I want it to be, and then building everything else around that sound.
I personally, I'm in my third year of teaching. I never have thought about the fact that the trombones being like the core of that particular sound. That actually makes a lot of sense, both just in the characteristic of their sound, but also just the way that their instruments are built and their ability to be really present throughout the texture of the ensemble. What do you think are some of the most I'll say the ingredients to a characteristic tone on a trombone?
Well, I mean, for me at least, it's making sure the kids have a solid embouchure and a good embouchure. And we can even talk about that in a little bit too. Certainly air, and maybe to the point that air is even more important than the embouchure piece. And then also to a certain extent, equipment is certainly important as well in making sure that the kids are on not only quality instruments, but are on mouthpieces that are the right size for depending where they are developmentally. I mean, for me, for example, the 12C that usually comes in the beginner's case with most student line instruments is just too small for most kids. Not for every kid, but for most kids. Mm-hmm. So I like to start them a little bit bigger. 6.5 AL is where most of our beginners start on. And we have a few 12Cs in, just kind of in the room, just in case we have a kid who really needs that size. So yeah, in terms of ingredients, those are probably the biggest three, I would think.
Could you expand a little bit more on like your thoughts on embouchure as part of that ingredient?
Sure. So when we start our beginners, and it might be a little bit different for us than from other schools. We start in 4th grade for our kids. Although due to the pandemic, our beginning class this year is in 5th grade. We weren't able to start beginners last year, and unfortunately, we were only able to start 1 year beginners this year. So our kids are a little bit younger than in a lot of programs, especially those programs that start in sixth and some in seventh grade. So the way we approach things might be a little bit different if we had older students. But we like to start with just having the embouchure in the shape of M, E, M, 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 M. And then once that's set, kind of firm around here, even though we don't really even talk about that, just M. We'll have the kids breathe in through their nose, M, and then exhale, kind of making a poo type sound. Very different than flute. There's no pucker. Like in flute, we have that pucker. In trombone, we still want the embouchure to keep shape, but the lips are opening up because of the air arriving. The air forces the aperture in the lips. And so we've started in that way the last several years after kind of experimenting with a lot of different things. So experimenting with starting kids buzzing their mouthpieces. And what we found is the kids develop a fuller, more resonant sound earlier if we start with the air. And so we'll kind of go through that process with the kids. Everybody say M in through the nose. And we'll just do that a few times. And then we go right to the horn. We start the kids mouthpiece. I start them 50-50. 50% top lip, 50% bottom lip, even though I play more 2/3 up top, 1/3 bottom, and even though most of my students will too. But that 50-50 is something that is really easy for my younger kids to be able to, when they're looking in the mirror, make sure they get that placement right, and go from there. And then they usually just kind of adjust on their own to something that's a little bit more comfortable. But then we'll just start with the instruments up. That same process, M in through the nose, blow, and we just let the resistance of the instrument create the buzz. And most kids are able to get out a sound, either a low B flat or an F, just from that, and letting the horn do the work. And so that's been really successful for us.
Absolutely.
So that said, obviously we don't want kids breathing through their nose forever. That's just something that we can get their embouchure set where they can then inhale without moving anything, because a lot of times the kids will inhale through their mouth and then not get reset completely, so that they can get that feel. And then also, what else was I going to say? We don't want them breathing through their nose forever, and there was something else we didn't want them doing forever, and I don't remember what that was.
Well, while you think about it, though, so I'm a euphonium player, and what you described is actually very much how I was taught, where it's 50% top and bottom. And then, of course, the longer that I played, the more that I started to adjust that. And then also when you were talking about the buzzing, I always found when I would start my beginners in my first year of teaching that going to buzzing right away, I noticed that it would actually promote a lot of tension. Versus now that I think about it, you're exactly right. Like when you start them from air and you start them from a place where you can just really focus on having them relax and get the air moving and letting the resistance of the instrument. I think that's a huge takeaway from that, is, something to let the instrument help them do the work and let them just be focusing on the air.
Well, and and I'm a huge proponent of mouthpiece buzzing, and I know there's two different schools of thought of that, and there's a school that's really against it. But for me, and it's one of the things I was going to talk a little bit about later in terms of exercises and that type of thing to maintain tone quality. Mouthpiece buzzing is super important. Rex Martin at Northwestern would say all the time, the buzzing the mouthpiece connects your brain to the music. And in my experience, if I have a kid play something and then I have them buzz it and then I have them play it again, it is always 100% of the time better that second time they play it. So for me, that's all I need to know that it's the right thing many times for my kids to be doing. We don't want them not buzzing their mouthpiece forever. We want them buzzing their mouthpiece eventually, but we've got to get that embouchure foundation set so that there's not too much tension and they're not forcing the buzz by pressing their lips together.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's really, really huge, especially just for those of us who are teaching those very, very beginners who have just been able to take the instrument out of the case. And you're exactly right. I think as soon as they can show you that they can do that with a characteristic sound, and then you want to, build endurance and range and other things, you're exactly right. I think going over to the mouthpiece buzzing is really terrific. I tell my students all the time, And they probably say that I say it too much, but I'll continue to say it. And that's, if you can buzz it, you can play it. And you're right. If you can make that difference between playing it the first time, buzzing it in between your third rep, it really makes all that much different. In addition to obviously doing mouthpiece buzzing, what else do you do to kind of check in with your developing musicians on this tone, outside of just what you set up with them in beginning band and the actual buzzing exercises?
Well, I think there's several exercises that kids should be doing regularly, and when they're with me, they do them every single time that they're with me. And that's mostly because I really consider tone to be like number one. That's priority number one, no matter what. We will not sacrifice tone for anything. It is the most important thing, and nothing is going to affect our tone. And so the exercises that I really like to do with the kids every single day, first and foremost, of course, are long tones. Mostly Remington exercises, but even just, this playing that concert F and playing it for a good 8 counts, working on a good attack, sustain, and release, and then going through the Remington exercise for sure. Lip slurs, flexibility exercises are tremendously important, and we'll start those as early as we possibly can in their first year of instruction. So once they're able to play a solid B flat, once they're able to play a solid concert F, then we're working on slurs between those 2 notes. And then working our way down the horn, of course, all the way through all 7 positions. With our 4th graders, we only do the first 6. But yeah, just working as far down that they can get. And then, that third one is mouthpiece buzzing, and mouthpiece buzzing, not mouthpiece buzzing as a tool to helping the kids be a little more flexible, smooth things out a little bit, and to keep a consistent quality of sound throughout the registers of their instrument.
Exactly. Yeah. And of course, I'm with you on the philosophy of tone. I did my student teaching with Kim Bain, and and so she always said in the beginning there was tone, and that's what has stuck through. As a matter of fact, if you read any of the GIA books, because I know you both have contributed to many of the same ones, that's in several of them, I believe, is just in the beginning there was tone, and her students all know that too, and every person who's interned with her. And so you're right, it's something that it's absolutely the pinnacle of what we do. It's what we needs to be the first and foremost thought. What habits do you notice, like bad habits, that start to trickle in at all with your students, or do you notice that bad habits do trickle in over time?
Well, I think for sure there's things that are fairly consistent that you see with especially young students, with beginners. One is just tension and being too tight in general, and trying to get, just going back to the air, going back to the form of the embouchure, as Pat Sheridan would say, and just trying to get the kids to focus on just that fundamental, and just not let tension creep in anywhere when they're playing. The other things I think fairly consistently as well is undersupported for sure, especially in young students. They just don't realize how much air they have to put through the horn, how big of a breath they have to play, and how to then use that air to create a great sound. And then I think the last thing is probably just the placement of their tongue within their mouth, for the lower register where the tongue needs to be a little bit lower, and then for the upper register when the tongue needs to be higher. And that's mostly noticeable as they're trying to then expand their range, and they're not able to have a good sound in the upper register because their tongues are just too low. The inside of their mouth is formed for a low note while they're trying to play a high note, and their embouchure just can't sustain that yet.
Those are always great to have in the back of our minds, especially tension when we are trying to expand their range and we're trying to expand their endurance. And it's very easy. I noticed as a young teacher myself, it was very easy for me to forget about the idea that while they could be trying to do something like that, they could also be building habits of building in tension.
Well, and the solution for that is to be doing those fundamental exercises, doing the Remingtons, going up from concert F, doing lip slurs as soon as they're ready, doing lip slurs that go up to that third partial, before they need it in their music, before they get to it in their method book, so that you can make sure that they're doing it correctly, so that when they get to it in their music, it's not the high note. They're not playing their quote unquote high B flat, you know, kids will just like play as high as they can. And that's how they know if
Exactly.
they're on their
Oh,
B
yeah.
flat. You know, it's, you know, that note is not as high as they can play by the time they get to that into their repertoire, because you've kind of developed the skills prior to them needing it in their music.
Yeah, I think that's very, very valuable. This is all fantastic stuff. And I know that the people who are listening to this will really enjoy being able to take some of the stuff that we've talked about today and maybe apply it even today in their classrooms, or, you know, at least in the near future. If anybody wants to reach you, has a question about anything regarding middle school band teaching, or even anything we've talked about today, what's the best way to reach you?
Best way is probably our website, McCrackenBand.com, and there's a contact link on that as well, and that would be the easiest way to find me.
Absolutely. Well, listen, we appreciate you very much, and thank you so much for taking time to share some of your knowledge with all of us, and appreciate it, my friend.
You're welcome.